What's up, YouTube? This is Big Mike. It's been a little while since I've done a video like this, so I'm going to talk about the last days, really the last years, but the last days of iconic comedian Richard Pryor, and what I can remember about it. I guess you got to go all the way back to the 80s. I mean, Richard Pryor was a wild guy, man. I mean, we all knew that his drug du jour was cocaine. I mean, he didn't just do cocaine, he loved cocaine. Loved it. There's this urban legend. I don't know how true it is. It might not be true, but there's this urban legend that he did so much cocaine that when supposedly Pam Grier, who was dating Richard Pryor for a little bit, said that she had gotten a pap smear, or whatever the fuck you call it, gynecological exam, a pap smear, whatever, and they found cocaine residue inside her vagina. And she later theorized that it might have gotten there from Richard Pryor maybe going down on her or whatever, and having loads of cocaine on his face or in his nose or whatever. And, you know, the point of it is just he did that much cocaine, if it's true. You know what I mean? I don't know how true it is. But of course, in 1980, around the time I was born, I know it was June 1980. That's when he suffered that devastating fire where he suffered like second and third degree burns. I think when he was hospitalized, the doctors gave him, oh man, what was it? They thought he was going to die. His chances weren't good. I can't remember the percentage, but I want to say it was like less than 10% chance of survival that they initially thought. And, you know, all of these television programs thought they were going to have to go and, you know, make a Richard Pryor obituary and all this stuff. And miraculously, he survived. And it slowed him down a little bit. But he still did drugs on occasion. I think he might have slowed down a little bit with the drugs, but he still did the drinking, you know, and he was still Richard Pryor. And my thing about Richard is I always thought that the 70s was his greatest period as far as creativity and as far as his material is concerned. The 70s was his greatest decade. By the 1980s, Richard was still funny. But I thought that he kind of, you know, he cashed out. You know what I'm saying? Like he was doing some films that, you know, you kind of wonder, like, what are you doing, Richard? You know, like The Toy. Now, I like Jackie Gleason, one of my favorite comedians ever, but that movie was horrible. Like, you know, I kind of liked the movie a little bit when I was a little kid, but now I can't sit there and watch that movie at all. When I do watch it, I grimace because of the racial connotation of the movie, you know what I mean? But Richard was cashing out, man. He was doing anything for a buck. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to say he was doing anything for a buck, but he was, you know, he was a movie star to an extent, and he was, you know, I guess he's one of those guys, if you offer him some money, you know, the script is okay, you know, whatever, he'll do it. He was gold with Gene Wilder. But the beginning of the end, the slow demise, and I say slow because he lasted for another 20 years almost. It began when he was on the set of a movie called Critical Condition in 1980. The movie was released in 1987, but I think he was making the movie in 1986. And it was on the set of Critical Condition where Richard Pryor said that in an interview that he had sat down one time. I think he was feeling kind of tired. That's probably one of the first things that he noticed, is that he felt kind of tired, while he was producing the movie. I think he was the producer of that movie. I'm not sure about that, but I think he was. I know he produces JoJo Dancer. Or he might have. I know he had sat down, and maybe he was just tired from filming. I can't remember whether he was a producer in that movie or not, but I know he was filming. Let's put it like that. And he sat down, and he said that when he went to get up, he couldn't move. He couldn't move his legs, and it freaked him out. And he said that eventually he could, move, but it freaked him out. And he also began to notice that he had begun to lose weight. So much so that when he made an appearance on Johnny Carson in late 1986, many people were shocked at his appearance. You can find an interview on YouTube. Many people were shocked at his appearance, and you gotta remember this is the mid 1980s, and a lot of people were speculating, wow, does Richard Pryor have AIDS? Because you also this might come as a shock to some people because it isn't common knowledge, but Richard Pryor was bisexual. He did engage in sex with both women and men, and while it wasn't as known publicly, it wasn't known by people, who are fans of Richard Pryor, but in Hollywood and in that circle, it was a well-known fact that Richard Pryor liked men and women. But that wasn't what it was. Richard Pryor had a rather aggressive form of multiple sclerosis. And slowly but surely, over the years, the symptoms of the disease began to progress. I think that Eddie Murphy was very, very sympathetic to Richard's health, because you gotta remember something. In 1989, when he did that movie Hear No Evil, See No Evil, Richard almost didn't do that movie. I think it was the next to last collaboration with Gene Wilder, and he almost didn't do that movie because he had lost confidence in himself. He didn't think that he could perform on screen. But the director of the time, the director who actually passed away last year along with Gene Wilder, the director encouraged Richard and said that you can still do it. And what the director did was he worked around Richard's physical shortcomings, and the movie still was funny. In Harlem Nights, Eddie Murphy did the same thing. If you guys notice in Harlem Nights, there are a lot of scenes, but you don't pay attention till you actually, if I tell you about it, then you'll notice it. There's a lot of scenes where his character Sugar Ray is sitting down. Or if he's standing, he's rather stationary. You don't see him walking a whole lot. That's because of the effects of multiple sclerosis. Now, Richard still appeared fine to me and you, but think about it. A lot of times in that movie, he was stationary or sitting down, or in that scene with Belinda Tolbert, supine. But ultimately, by the early 1990s, the symptoms were really, really progressing. The last movie he did with Gene Wilder, Another You, was awful. And you could see the progression of multiple sclerosis even more. Okay? There was a tribute special to him in 1991. I think it might have been on CBS or something like that. And you could see that Richard at that time had to have people assist him at times when he's walking. This is when he was really starting to decline physically. And I remember, wow, it might have been like 1994 or so. Maybe late 93. Might have been 93. Richard Pryor made a cameo on Martin. And you could see by that time the progression of the illness. He had slowed down a lot. His movements, his mannerisms, everything was slowing down. In the early 1990s, Richard Pryor had a massive heart attack and nearly died. I think it was his second heart attack. He had one in the late 1970s. And he had to have quadruple bypass surgery or something like that. And by the mid-1990s, Richard was confined to a wheelchair. I know he hated it. I know he hated, at that relatively young age, he was only in his mid-50s, to be living in a life that you expect more for someone who's 30 years older than him, at least. Confined to a wheelchair, dependent upon others. I know he hated it, to be confined in that body. And his public appearances began to diminish more and more. Richard became, understandably, I could, as his symptoms became very, very pronounced, he became a recluse. And I think he had his last screen credit in 1997. He had a cameo in some movie. It was some movie that I think it was 1997. It was some movie with the actor that played, what is his name? The actor that was accused of murdering his wife. I think he was in that movie. What is his name? I think he played in Beretta. You guys know what I'm talking about if you're older. Guys who are older in their 50s and up. You guys know what I'm talking about. Robert Blake. It was some movie, something Highway to Hell or something, Lost Highway. I think that's the name of the movie, 1997. It was some movie that Robert Blake did. That was the last screen credit, I think, that Richard Pryor had. And as we went into the 21st century, man, Richard was in bad shape, man. Bad shape. Norm Macdonald talked about it too one time on a podcast, where he said when he saw Richard, it might have been not too long before he died, a couple of years maybe, he said Richard had gotten to the point where he could no longer talk. And he was pretty much just stationary, And he had that, and I've seen that facial expression before. It's a photo that he took with Eddie Griffin, and I've seen that expression before, where Richard pretty much had like the glazed over, like open eyes, and there's no facial expression, and he's totally trapped in this body that is rejecting him in so many different ways, right? And I think in 2003, I think that was the year, Richard was diagnosed with chronic renal failure. I think that's the name, kidney failure, or chronic renal failure or something like that. Basically, his kidneys were failing, and he had to go on dialysis. Another thing that Richard did that led to his demise, it wasn't just the drugs, but it was also his heavy cigarette smoking. You guys might have noticed that in various interviews over the years, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even when he had multiple sclerosis, even when he was confined in a wheelchair, Richard kept smoking, and he was a chain smoker. And that led to Richard developing coronary artery disease, which is the reason why Richard had that heart attack when he was so young, when he was only in his late 30s, and another one when he was in his early 50s. Matter of fact, he might have still been 49 when he had that heart attack. So, and this also was a factor in his kidney disease. And the morning of December 10th, 2005, his caregiver woke up and went to the home. I think his caretaker lived in the home, I think. And he went on to see Richard, and he noticed that Richard was having problems, appeared to be having problems breathing. He tried to assist Richard. Ultimately, he called 911 after he calmed down. I think he was panicking. And when the paramedics arrived, they concluded that Richard was in cardiac arrest. Richard Pryor was rushed to the nearest hospital, and the doctors worked frantically to try to save this great comedian's life, this iconic comedian who changed the history of comedy because he broke down so many walls. He, and to a slightly lesser extent, George Carlin, this George Washington of comedy. They tried frantically to save his life, but he was gone. Just a week after his 65th birthday, Richard Pryor was dead. And I still think that Richard Pryor got a raw deal when it came to life, because it's like he died December 10th, 2005. And I remember when I found out, too, I was on this phone site called, I think it was called UPOC. This is like a precursor to all of the social media sites we have out there now. And I remember I was in one of these chat groups, and everybody kept saying, "Rest in peace, Richard Pryor." And I'm like, what the hell are they talking about? And that's how I found out that Richard Pryor had died that morning. But a sad end to a great life in so many ways. I know the last 20 years or so were challenging to Richard and for Richard, but this is the Richard I want to remember. The wildly gesticulating, screaming banshee at times who told like it is. And he was real, he was raw, he was Richard, and he'll be remembered forever.